my name is Kelly O'Connor, and I'm the Prevention Services Manager from Oak Park Township, and I'm also the Positive Youth Development Work Group Coordinator at the Oak Park Township. And there are many members from the coalition in the audience, and I would like to say thank you to everyone for coming out tonight in the rain for this very interesting and informative evening. And I'm going to introduce Peggy Kell from the League of Women Voters.
I am Peggy Kell. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Oak Park and River Forest. I generally do the Voter Service Committee, the website. So if you have any issues or if you'd like to see more of what we do for the League, go to LWVOPRF.org. And you will find a lot of our programming listed and other things that you can get involved in the community. What I'm going to do right now is introduce our panelists. And then after I do introductions for all of them, then they're going to be speaking on their areas of expertise and knowledge areas. After they're all done speaking, then we will have a question and answer period. You all have, or should have had, a index card and something to write with on your chairs. Please use those for the questions. We'll have some league people walking around towards the end of the presentation by the panelists to pick them up. I will then be moderating those questions just to make sure we don't have any duplications or make sure everything's flowing smoothly. So if you have any questions, please write them down on there as clearly as possible. So we're going to start from your left to right with Senator Lightfoot. Senator Kimberly Lightfoot was elected to the Illinois Senate in 1998, representing the 4th Senate District that includes suburban districts in western Cook County, as well as the Austin area of Chicago. She and her family live in Maywood. During her career, Senator Lightfoot has worked on issues related to education, mental health, and working families. Senator Lightfoot is a majority leader of the Senate. She has served on the Education, Redistricting, and Labor Committees. In 2018, then Governor-elect Pritzker appointed her to the Educational Success Transition Committee. She also chairs the Illinois Senate Black Caucus. She voted in support of legislation that creates an automatic expungement process, a social equity program, and a vocational training pilot program for those that had been in prison because of marijuana offenses. To your right and her left is Christina Kalpa. She is with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Ms. Kalpa focuses on criminal justice reform policy for diversion, mental health, and restorative justice. Prior to her role with the State's Attorney's Office, Christina facilitated research and program development for the Data-Driven Justice Initiative, a partnership between the University of Michigan's Poverty Solutions and the Detroit Police Department. Christina received a Master's of Public Policy from the University of Michigan, Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy, with an emphasis in equity promoting policy and local government. She has worked on a range of issues related to social and poverty alleviating policies for the City of Fargo, City of Chicago, and now the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Next to her is Chief LaDon Reynolds from the Oak Park Police Department. Chief Reynolds joined the Oak Park Police Department in 1994 and rose steadily through the ranks. He holds a Master's of Science degree in Education and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Administration of Justice from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. He's also a graduate of the FBI National Academy, the Senior Management Institute for Police, the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board Executive Institute, and the Community Leadership Program at Dominican University's Brennan School of Business. Next to the chief is Sergeant Ben Ransom from the River Forest Police Department. Officer Ransom has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Loyola University and has been with the River Forest Police Department for 7 years. He is currently the Crime Prevention Officer, School Resource Officer, Elderly Service Officers, and Business Liaison for the River Forest Police Department. He has been trained in DUI enforcement, drug recognition, and drug impairment recognition. He instructs and presents on topics of drugs to students at elementary, high school, and college level. And he is an instructor at Dominican University and Concordia University campus safety departments on topics of drug recognition and drug impairment recognition. Next to Sergeant Ranson is Abu Edwards, Director of State's Affairs Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Mr. Edwards is an experienced professional organizer with over 10 years' experience in community, campaign, political, and issue-based organizing. Co-founders of Millennials in Action, whose mission is toward organizing, educating, and empowering urban millennials and community residents to play a really important role in reaching concepts. He is also active with Philadelphia Free Library, Members of Blacks in Government, and the National Coordinator of the FLAG program, which is Future Leaders of American Government. Finally, next to Mr. Edwards is Anita Pendor, Executive Director of the Way Back In. Ms. Pendor has been with the Way Back In since 2002. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor and holds certifications in substance use disorders, gambling disorders, domestic violence, and anger management. Anita attended Loyola University for her undergraduate degree and Benedictine University for her Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology. Anita sits on the board of the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling, the Illinois Alliance on Problem Gambling. Now, we have just two microphones that they're going to pass along. So that one needs to be turned on. There's a little red button at the bottom of it. You can turn it on. But I will get off the podium now, and each one of the panelists will now talk about their areas of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. And thanks for hosting such a wonderful gathering of the community to discuss an important law that's taken shape on January 1. It's a pleasure to join the state's attorney, the police chief, sergeant. I feel so protected on tonight, and the community activists and the Way Back In. I'm Senator Kimberly Lightford, and I spoke about this subject at the Way Back In a couple weeks ago. And, you know, I really didn't know exactly what all I should cover on that day. When you look at a bill that was just so many pages, so detailed, and so extensive. And what I found that day was that there were many people who just didn't know what was in the bill. And I think it's always a lot of conversation just around what we think it should be, or we don't know how it happened, and it happened so quickly. So I wanted to just play a role in just some of the explanation of the bill, how it came to be, and then be able to answer any questions that anyone may have afterwards. Now, in this 6 minutes, what I do know is that when I just did this survey, that my daughter just turned 18, and so now I know nothing. If you may have asked me something before July, I could have known something, but now I know nothing. But then I saw the first question in the age group was 50 and over, and I'm like, oh my God, I fell in the 50 and over. And I never had to scan all the way down to E, so I'll need to put my glasses on. So what I wanted to do was should I stand at the podium, or I'm not sure what setup you're in. Okay. I'm gonna stand. I think I have a better interjection. Okay. Because what I would like to do is kind of just go over the notion that, oh, it happened so fast. They just came up with this law out of nowhere, which really isn't true. So Senator Heather Staines and Representative Cassidy have been working on this issue about 3 years prior to the candidates running for governor. We had created a small committee within the Illinois Senate and then the Illinois House. And as the chairman of the Senate Black Caucus, the Joint Black Caucus, I should say, I sent 2 members to participate, which was Senator Toy Hutchinson in the Senate and Representative Jahan Gordon Booth, one of the majority leaders were participants from day one, took shape about 3 years ago. Well, when the race came about and the governor candidates were questioned where they would be, once the members found out that there were governor candidates who were in favor, it began to take shape and spiral much faster than it had been the previous 3 years. And I think that's when mainly the community got wind of what was happening, because it was pretty much covered in a campaign. And so I don't know if that brought too much light to it from a different angle, but at least we all knew that there was potential of our state going from just being a medical state to a recreational state. And so one of the things I wanted to do is just quickly talk to you about the difference, or I would say the concern with cannabis and the opioid crisis. So many people right away, I'm gonna talk about the bad things that we hear. And one of those is young people. That, you know, we're offering this, more it becomes law, more young people have access. And when you survey young people, they tell you that, oh, we're already doing that. We're vaping, we're smoking, we do all of these things in an illicit market. A market that's not controlled, a market that has no regulations. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to make sure that we regulated the market, that we controlled the substance of not only cannabis, but opioids as well. And so some of the benefits that we took into account is that it could help with anxiety and PTSD, that it relieves chronic pain and nausea. Some people testified that how cannabis really helps them with epilepsy, and that it could be a safer alternative to opioids. And so what I was thinking then is we have to get this right. If we're going to legalize recreation and go beyond medical, we've got to do this right in a number of places. And so for me, social equity was very, very important. Expungement process was very important on what that looked like. And I wanted to make sure that law enforcement was a critical component to all of our negotiations. So when I hear people say that law enforcement wasn't involved, they were at every table that I sat at for a negotiation, so I find that not to be true. Now, if they're opposed to it, that's fine, which if they choose to do so, that's fine, but then there's still a regulation that has to take shape, and we need law enforcement, and we need to work with law enforcement, and we need to make sure that the legalization of cannabis is I would say running right alongside with the support of law enforcement. So one of the, I just saw I had a minute. So local control is really important, and that's why we're here. We established the law so that every community had the ability to opt out, or if they like to keep it, they can establish an ordinance that allow for zoning to their community and what they wanted. We also wanted to make sure that we protected employers and landlords. So this does not mean that an employee, that you have to, I should say you're protected if you use cannabis by your employer, because you're not. The same way you're not expected to go to work under the influence of alcohol, you shouldn't go to work under the influence of cannabis. And then the same things with landlords. If a landlord say to you, we do not allow consumption in our building, then they do not allow consumption in their building, which means that you would have to find a public consumption place, because there's no smoking down the streets or in the park or any of that. Law enforcement, of course, they're not interested in you smoking in your vehicle. So what we wanted to make sure that there was some consumption, because we're looking at communities that's been heavily impacted on the war on drugs, but then we don't provide any places for them to consume. It puts them in a catch-22 as well. So we wanted to make sure that there was a control location that they could go to based on the community's wishes. So we tried to tie some of those things in, and quickly I have to stop on revenue allocations. When we get to question and answer, I'll be able to throw some percentages to you in terms of how much money we're looking to have this generate, what the breakdown looks like on where the funding would go. and things like that. Thank you.
Joking that we should concede our time to you because there's so much to cover in this bill. There's so much. I'm Christina Copa. I'm with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I'm a policy advisor there where I will work on mostly non-putative efforts in the office. And so one of the big projects I've been working on over the last, almost 9 months already has been cannabis. So under State's Attorney Fox, the office policy has been that we decline to prosecute low levels of possession of marijuana. So we announced back in January that we were going to be looking for ways that we could move to provide conviction relief on those offenses, both because we knew the legislation was coming and because we knew it was the right thing to do. That these convictions disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities 7-1 in Cook County, and that these are the types of convictions that aren't telling us whether or not someone's a threat to public safety. So we made sure that we were at the table in these conversations on legislation for cannabis and marijuana conviction relief, and really where our piece of the legislation came to be and the things we were most involved with was the expungement piece and the automatic expungement piece, because what we know about expungement is that only about 1 out of every 3 people in California under their legislation with marijuana have taken advantage of the fact that they can get these convictions expunged. And in Michigan, I believe the number is around 6%. So we really wanted to make sure that this happened in a way that was equitable and extensive, in a way that made sure we accessed the most people we possibly could. And so for us, that meant automatically. What that has trickled down to into those 610 pages, I think about 100 of which are all around record clearance in this bill, is that convictions of 30 grams or less of possession will be automatically cleared from individuals' records. So those are misdemeanor offenses. That means their arrest record, that means their conviction, any method of probation or any type of record will be automatically expunged, either through a process with the Illinois State Police or through a pardon with the governor. And what's really exciting here in Cook County, and what we are really excited about in the legislation, is that it gives the state's attorney's office the ability to move to vacate on individuals' behalfs. So what that means is, kind of in very general terms, sealing a record means you're putting it essentially in a safe that only law enforcement can access, but it's not going to show up on an individual's background check, with the exception of a few felony offenses and fingerprinting employment opportunities. Then there's expungement, which is deleting it like it never happened. And then there's vacating, which is essentially saying this never happened. We're going to undo this conviction, which is really important in cases with immigration consequences. Otherwise, to the average person, it's not going to look any different on their record. So here in Cook County, we're going to be moving to vacate those offenses for anyone starting with those 30 grams or less convictions. But what the legislation allows for is up to Class 4 felonies, which is up to 500 grams of possession and possession with intention to distribute of 30 grams or less. And the rationale for us on that piece of the legislation is that a very, very small number of people are poised to make billions of dollars off of this industry, where a lot of our entrepreneurs, we'll call them, have been making ends meet as a means of selling throughout their entire life. And the state's attorney had very compelling stories about her experiences growing up in Cabrini Green and the number of people that she has known personally be sent to prison for 3 to 5 years for selling low levels of marijuana. And so we were at the table to say, we know this is going to happen. It's not going to happen without us opening that door to equity and opportunity as much as we can from our seat at the table. So there's a lot to cover here tonight, and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of your questions and answers. But with respect to the expungement piece, that first batch of expungements is mandated by the legislation to be completed by 2021. And those are the convictions that go back to 2013. All of those convictions are mandated to be expunged by 2025. But we're hoping in Cook County that we're able to move a little bit faster. There's 770,000 estimated records statewide. Cook County is expected to have most of those. For some context, we handle about 19,000 convictions a year in Cook County, fully staffed, fully operating. So for us to be able to get through all of those by 2021 or 2025, we would need to quadruple our resources in the office. So we announced in August that we're going to be partnering with an organization based out of California called Code for America. They're a not-for-profit tech organization whose sole mission is to make tech work better in government so that government can work better for the people. And so we've been working with them to try to figure out what are the ways that we can automate this process, what are the ways that we can streamline this process. And those are really exciting things that if you want to talk afterward, I can share a little bit about what that technology looks like with you. But the nuts and bolts of it is when they came and they did a test run on some of our publicly available data through our website, they were able to populate all of the paperwork for 10,000 convictions in 1 minute. So we are very, very hopeful that in Cook County, at no cost to any of you, we will be able to do this not only equitably, but efficiently, and ahead of those deadlines. So I'll turn it over to my law enforcement partners. But
I actually have a lot less to say than that. It's the law. You know, I tell you, the Illinois Chiefs have been working with the state Senate and the legislature to make sure that we have a bill that's comprehensive and that addresses some of the issues that confront policing and law enforcement in this area. What I'll talk to you about, though, just very briefly, is you know, for us, it's analogous to packaged liquor. Okay, and in that regard, I think it's incumbent upon parents and family members to educate their kids, and just like you hear as it relates to liquor, consume responsibly. Does that make sense to you? What we're not looking for is that we don't want people behind the wheel of a car. We're concerned about DUI, although there is no accurate test right now, but I think that's being worked on. And we want to make sure that quality of life issues that impact other citizens, you know, as you consume, don't become an issue. So for us, again, it's analogous to packaged liquor. We want to make sure that it's consumed responsibly. Some of the issues that we have heard from other states relate to it being a cash business because it's against the law federally, but I think someone's working on that now. So some of these establishments may have a lot of cash on hand, which makes them susceptible to robbery, although usually those establishments are pretty fortified, especially if they're in urban environments. So the question becomes, as that money is transported, but that becomes another issue. The other thing that we look at is you know, the potential for consumption by youth, and I'll give Ben the opportunity to kind of speak on that. But again, it's the law. We look at it in a lot of ways like packaged liquor. I'm sure there's some other things that are coming out with the bill. I think there's some other bills coming up related to the law. And so we'll look at those and see what avenues we can take to make sure that we keep all of us safe. And that's the primary concern. Thank you.
So just to piggyback off what the chief was saying, as far as our concerns, I think we can agree that it's about usage and overusage by our youth, and also the usage and giving in the car and driving. And so that we know it's law. We're prepared to enforce the law when it comes to that. As far as driving, we have officers now that are DUI trained and drug DUI trained that are on the streets now looking for drivers that are impaired, whether it's by any form of drugs or combination with alcohol. And I think that's an important point to make, is that the usage of even a small amount of cannabis mixed with alcohol can have really strong effects, possibly, and studies show potentially stronger than usage of one of those substances on their own. So I think that's important that we understand that alcohol and cannabis together can be potentially dangerous or more dangerous, especially for our drivers. When we talk about youth, that's a real concern for us, especially as a school resource officer. And I'm in the schools, and I teach Too Good for Drugs and these programs that teach kids to make smart decisions. And it's really, as the chief said, it's about everyone making smart decisions and being responsible. And we know that the youth aren't supposed to be using it anyway, and that's still going to be illegal. But are we going to be proactive in teaching them to to use, not to use, but to make the smart decisions when the time comes, whether it comes when they're 21 or when they're younger, which we see that that's probably more likely to happen. And so what I tell the kids, and I tell them it about alcohol and about vaping, and I'll continue to preach it to the students that I have about cannabis use is just because it's legal doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you or the right decision for you or even the right decision at this time. And even if it is, it still can be abused, it can be overused, and are you making a conscious decision, whether you're a child, adult, and it really goes for everyone with all kinds of things. It could be talking about alcohol, it could be talking about even exercise. People can exercise too much and overwork their bodies. So I think it's just a good rule of thumb that we talk about moderation, especially for our adults that are going to be using. And so just with our youth, I think that having a lot of parental monitoring and education and having our communities stay up to date, stay current with what's going on as we kind of all move forward with this, and just being able to help your children make the right decisions and let them know that just as if you were monitoring to make sure they're not going to underage drinking parties, that we're not going to underage smoking parties, which who knows what kind of changes this could have. So just one more thing that I tell the kids, and I like to just point out, and I'll leave the health implications to our healthcare professionals. But we do know that kids in high school, their brains are still very much developing, and this use could hamper that, could alter that, and up to age 21 through even age 25. So we really want to discourage them for that fact alone, that their mental health, their brains developing is the most important right now. And if they can make the decision to wait, just like as if they were to wait to use alcohol, then that's the best decision for them.
Do I really need to use a mic, or can everyone hear me? You can hear me? My name is Boo Edwards.
Can you stand at the podium?
Okay.
Thanks.
No worries. I feel like college graduation over again.
Although it may be better for the videotape.
Yeah. Press the mic, please. Thank you.
Hello?
That's why I don't use mics. Just as it was stated, my name is Boo Edwards. I have the opportunity to serve as the National Director of State Affairs for SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. What is that? I get an opportunity to travel to every state who's thinking about legalizing recreational marijuana. So I travel at least 75 to 80% of my time. I'm never home, so I'm paying for rent for nothing. And I get an opportunity to meet with law enforcement from around the country, elected officials, community leaders, prevention. And I'll be honest, I probably have one of the toughest jobs in America right now, especially walking into a room as an African American. I'm 30, I'm a millennial, and opposing this issue. But just to give you some background about me, I was born in '88. My mother and my father both got caught up in the crack epidemic in '87. So I was born a crack infant. And if it wasn't for community leaders, my mom being clean for over 20 years, I would have fell victim right into that. I'm the first person in my family to go to college, 1 out of 16 kids. And when I was young and seeing my parents grow through that issue and being surrounded, because if you know anything about Philadelphia, we have a lot of drugs. We're like the center of the opioid crisis. And growing up, you can literally go to the corner store, you can go right next door to the speakeasy and get every particular drug you ever wanted right up the street. And as a young person looking at my friends who were smoking weed at ages 14, 15 years old, and now taking a step back and at the age of 30 years old, I saw the same people who were smoking weed when we were young kids, popping Xannies, perks, and going on to opioids. Because the opioid epidemic is not just a white thing. It is a people's thing. We have brothers and sisters out there who are hooked on Percocets, Oxycontins, any type of opioids you want to think of that they're using. What I want to tell you guys today is that with my travels from every state who are thinking about legalizing or states who haven't, there's a lot of issues, right? We look at the state of Colorado. A lot of people point to Colorado saying, hey, the youth consumption rate for young people have decreased. But they're not looking at the youth incarceration rate in Colorado has increased. Because at the end of the day, it is still illegal for a young person to possess marijuana. When you look at the DUIs, Colorado, an increase in DUIs. Every state who legalized recreational marijuana have seen an increase in DUIs. If you look at the state of Colorado, do anybody want to take a guess where the majority of the dispensaries are? In what neighborhoods? Anybody want to take a quick guess? Urban black neighborhoods. I live in a community where if I walk out the door and I make a right or I make a left and I go to the corner, I see a liquor store and a church and maybe a few strip clubs. And I have my niece with me where she's seeing all this commercialization of tobacco and other products. Right next to that liquor store, we're going to be putting a dispensary next to that liquor store, and in the same communities that have low graduation rates, high unemployment rates. It makes no sense. This is not a social justice issue, because my personal opinion about this is the fact that before anyone can make a penny from legalization, people who've been affected by this should be out, reinstated with the proper resources needed to succeed. This should not be a double-edged thing. Legalize recreational marijuana so we can erase John and Pookie's records. That's not cool. Because if we really wanted to do it, if our lawmakers really wanted to step up, they could literally expunge records, seal records of folks with small amounts of marijuana. We don't need to legalize another drug to let people out of jail. Guys, this is not about us. This is not about the guy on the porch rolling up a backwood or a blunt smoking weed. This is about big corporations coming into our communities, setting up shop, and making money off addiction in our communities. Do we really want that? So yes, in January, the state of Illinois will be legalizing recreational marijuana, but at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that your voice stops. If you've been paying attention to Michigan, over 400 counties have opted out for commercializing sales. 400 in Michigan. So what that means is that the state revenue projections are lower than expected. And I hope that we can get the same momentum in the state of Illinois to really start educating our county officials to really opt out, because we don't need any more dispensaries or any type of commercializations in our communities, near our schools. Our kids need to be going to school, graduating, and being the future doctors, leaders of America. Thank you very much.
With the Way Back In. The Way Back In is a long-term treatment facility. We have a location here in Oak Park and one in Maywood, and we serve the whole state of Illinois. We also provide intensive outpatient and outpatient services. And it put me on the end here to talk to you about addiction. Some people might call it like a buzzkill, but I will tell you kind of all the things that marijuana does and doesn't do. So, there's a lot of debate back and forth about this, and one of my hopes is that the legalization process will actually allow us to do more research, understand more about this drug, and really be able to provide treatment to those people who do need treatment. There is always going to be a segment of the population who will need treatment no matter what the drug is. Alcohol is a legal drug, and it is still the most used, abused, and treatment-wise drug. So in our treatment facility, we still see over 50% of people who do use alcohol, followed by opiates, as we do see opiate as kind of the epidemic that it is right now. And I really do hope that as we progress into January and that changes take place, that we will understand to do things right and not do things the way we did with the opiate and have the same opiate epidemic that happened in the 90s and the 2000s. So cannabis is a psychoactive drug. So it is a drug. If it's legal, if it's illegal, if you buy from the dispensary, or if you buy it from your local drug dealer down the street. We do live in the greater kind of area of Chicago. You can get whatever you want, wherever you want, and people are using whatever they want, but it is still a drug no matter how it comes. And we do know that there's various forms of it being used. People smoke it, people vape it. It's kind of in extracts and in food. And there are those portions of it that have the actual THC of it and not. But right now, until there is more research being done, we really don't know what's kind of in it. We do know though that when it's inhaled, your heart rate actually speeds up. And so normal heart rate is somewhere like at 70 to 80 beats per minute, and it can increase it so much as 20 to 50 beats per minute. So the 130 beats per minute, that's pretty fast. Like your heart is going really fast. And some people report that they use it for anxiety. However, at 130 beats, it mimics a panic attack. So a lot of people, when they come in, they do talk about feeling super anxious or super paranoid when they're taking the drug, because it does happen. With this rising in blood pressure and the heart rate, you will often reduce your ability to carry oxygen, and therefore when you stand up, you might feel very dizzy, which might often result in falling, and that might result in people getting hurt. This is a concern for everyone across the board, right? So young people will fall, they will get hurt, they're at one of these smoking parties, nobody really helps them, and they might pass out and die. But this also affects older adults who might be using it for pain or other purposes. You fall, you break a hip, there might be other issues going on. It also affects cardiovascular system, obviously, as the heart is working harder. It does produce the potential for heart attacks, heart disease, and depending on your risk, your vulnerability, your age, it has some side effects there. It also has been shown to result in a very aggressive form of testicular cancer in young adult males who start smoking when they're teenagers. So we really want to be kind of aware of the potential dangers, as well as a cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is just a fancy term for long-term severe nausea, vomiting, and dehydration. It usually affects those under 50, and it stops when you stop smoking marijuana. And then smoking marijuana daily obviously affects the lungs, and which might result in the same toxins as cigarettes and nicotine. And there's, of course, the issues with fighting bacterial infections, fungal infections, and lung disease such as cancer. So we really want to be kind of aware, and as we're educating our youth and older, as we're educating adults across the spectrum, we kind of want to be aware of what it can do. There's always the questions, law enforcement has these questions, employers have these questions of how long it stays in your system. There's really no good evidence. They've done some prison studies once upon a time, and they said that it stays in your system for about 15 days. I have seen it in people's system for as long as 90 days. It really depends on how much is being smoked and how potent it is. So, today's marijuana is not the marijuana of yesterday. So in the 1970s, the potency was like 3 to 4%, where today we're seeing it as high as 11%, 55%. It can go up to as high as 98%. That is a very different marijuana. We do not know how long that's going to stay in somebody's system, and we generally want to make sure that we kind of have a little bit more research done on these things before we're just kind of giving it out to everybody. And real quickly, as I have a minute left, I will go over kind of the effects of the brain and addiction. So not everybody will obviously be addicted, and it doesn't mean that just because you use something you're going to become addicted, but we do see with marijuana that about 8% of the general population will become addicted. As there is more availability, there usually is that greater potential of people using, which those numbers just simply go up. We really do not know what causes addiction. We do know that there is a genetic component to it, and we also know that there's an environmental component. And so there is that biology, and there's just the fact that we have the means for it, and it's available and it's there. I will say that marijuana does greatly impact your frontal cortex and your hippocampus. So it does affect your memory, it does affect your judgment, it does affect your motor coordination and reaction time. Therefore, people should not drive and use marijuana. People should not be doing any kind of difficult jobs. And we will see a decrease in productivity when people are using. So recreational use should be that, it should be recreational use, but we cannot expect people to be able to perform when they are kind of using. And she said stop, but I will just mention one last thing. There was a study done, and when they did kind of impairment, long-term marijuana users had an impairment of about 70% on decision-making skills when they did kind of a test like we did today. Short-term users had about 55%, and then non-users had 8%. So, we do see that there definitely is significant impact. And with that, thank you.
All right, thank you. We've got a lot of information on a lot of different aspects of this topic. Now we're going to go into the question and answer period, and if you have a question and wrote it down, we've got some people that are collecting them. If you will pass them over, if you see some empty cards also as questions are being asked, that you would like to write another one. You're not limited to one question during the evening, but please grab another card and write another question if you think that you haven't gotten the information or that question hasn't been asked yet. All right. Okay, let's start it off. And how we do this, we don't have a ton of questions, at least not right yet. So I'm going to throw it out there, and if one of you would like to answer, or more than one of you would like to answer, if we can keep the answers short and to the point, that would help alleviate getting to more questions, and it would also help with other people putting their input on the question also. So the first question, if someone smokes every day, is there any period of time where then they are sober?
Well, I'm guessing I will take this one. But I assume that would be a no, because if you smoke every day, I mean, it depends on how potent it is, it depends on how much you're smoking, but the general answer would probably be no. I mean, the half-life of it is only a few hours long, but, it would be in your system continuously.
Anybody else have any?
And just like you said, it's about the potency level of marijuana. I've known folks who went to sleep high and woke up high the next day. I know some folks who've been high for a few days, depending on what they ate, or what they vaped, or what they smoked. So, I guess one of the issues is how long, like you said, how long does marijuana stay in your system, and does that mean that you are actually still high? So these are just a lot of unknown answers that we're just trying to seek out as we continue this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that most of I'm undergrad is in science, but I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, and so I won't speak as one, but marijuana has not been legalized federally. So the research that has been able to be conducted hasn't been done by nationally, like the National Health Institute or things of that nature. So there are a lot of questions that we don't have answers to because it hasn't been able to be regulated. And a lot of the answers in studies that are out there are based on the fact that we don't have regulated concentrations. And so there are harder obstacles when we're thinking about answering these types of questions about what does exist out there and what are the opportunities for regulation within that too. So I would just put that caveat out there when we're thinking about studies and the like.
Thank you. Can Illinois communities opt out after they've opted in?
Yes, absolutely. It is total discretion by the local municipality, and some of the things that they can do is also set the zoning ordinance where they can govern the time, the place, the manner, the number of establishments for operation in their city, and then also if they want to allow for public consumption or not.
Actually, I like this question. What is a practical example of 30 grams of marijuana?
I have no idea.
I usually bring parsley with me. but I didn't want to get stopped.
What would 30 grams look like?
30 grams of,
How many joints?
I would say 30 grams would probably be, and someone don't quote me on this, it's like 25, 30 blunts, probably a little more.
So maybe if those of us maybe who will admit to having knowledge of how big a blunt is. If you would like it in cigarettes, because maybe they have a little bit more experience with that, so it would be about 30 cigarettes, or I think the gentleman said it's like a pack of cigarettes.
And the legislation aims to regulate that 30 grams or less has an equivalency of the 500 milligrams of THC or the 5 grams of the cannabis concentration. So the legislation is really trying to target that potency level. And so they've set standards across the board for how much you're able to purchase and possess legally to ensure that you are within that potency level and that each of those are equivalent, because this isn't just going to be blunts that are being sold, it's going to be edibles, it's going to be vape cartridges, it's going to be so many different things. I'm sure you've all seen the infused beverages for CBD and all of the potential therein. So it's really beyond just how much can you hold in your hand. It's what's that potency level.
And just to follow back up, I mean, I don't want us to get too wrapped around about, is it 30 grams, is it 45 grams? We are looking at the potency level, because if you have 30 grams and it's, 10% or 15% THC, then you have something like 15 to 5 to 10 grams, but it has 99.9%, and that is still a problem that we're not really thinking about. So I kind of want to just kind of take the idea of possession and kind of look at the potency cap and the levels. Like I said, there right now federally, we're trying to fight for states to mandate THC caps, meaning that some states should have up to more than 4%. But then we're going against big marijuana, big pharma, because once you put caps on marijuana, then you are cutting into profit, because at the end of the day, this business profits off addiction.
Thank you. For those that are against legislation, what would you say to patients and those that have seen positive effects of using the drug?
Can you repeat that one more time?
For those that are against legislation, what would you say to patients and those that have seen positive effects from using the drug?
I would say that I am not against medical marijuana. I do have some questions about medical marijuana, but I am not against medical marijuana. I'm literally advocating to make sure that states understand what it means to legalize the state and what impacts and implication that comes with legalization. So, smart approaches to marijuana. We're not fighting against medical marijuana. We do understand that some people who may have cancer may use it to help to eat. There's literally no evidence stating that medical marijuana actually cures cancer, but we've seen that it may help someone, like I said, eat or feel a little bit more pain, but there's not actual stats and information that medical marijuana is the cure for all cancer or illnesses.
I think this is actually another one kind of building on talking about Senator. What are municipalities allowed to regulate?
Yeah, and so we left a lot of discretion up to local control for conversations such as this. And so if your town already opt out and they want to opt back in, or vice versa, it would be up to the local board to bring that initiative back up. So it would have to be affirmative vote to bring it back to the table to rediscuss it. But I know what we put in statute specifically is that they can control the zoning, the locations, the hours, the fees. They can add on additional fees above what the state has put in place. And can pretty much put whatever regulations in place that they'd like to have in place. So the distance from a school, the distance from a liquor store. And I do know that in the public consumption places, no alcohol is allowed. And so there would more than likely not be any liquor license released to public consumption sites. those are the things that
Senator, maybe you can help me out with this one too. It's also not going to be a total overwhelming of neighborhoods of where we're going to see these dispensaries pop up. I believe they just released the maps this week of what the zones throughout the state are going to be and throughout the county. And there's 14 licenses for dispensaries that are allowed per zone. And so it's really a very small number of places that are going to be able to sell this. And they have capped each of those licenses across the board, whether it's growers, distributors, dispensaries, craft grow, all of those things have pretty stringent caps in Illinois, and then it will be up to the local government agencies to decide how are they going to distribute them. And then there's the very exciting piece of the Illinois legislation, which is the social equity piece, but also the R3 grants. And so there is very, very intentional language to not only think about where are these dispensaries being placed, but how are we reinvesting in neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted and disinvested in the past and affected by the war on drugs.
What is the zone? What is defined
So-
the zone is?
Yeah, the zoning is based on state police districts. So we're not talking about the cultivation license that was released yet, because we just, yesterday, the state went online for applications for dispensaries. And so there's 75 available licenses for dispensaries. But they can only be in certain areas that was just described. But even when we get down the line in 2021 or 2020, and then they apply and they receive the license in 2021 for cultivations, there's only one cultivation site per state police district, which is how the medical cannabis is set up, and that is what we were trying to also follow for recreation.
A couple of questions here about people that, the home grower that are medical people, how will they be policed? And will citizens be able to grow cannabis in their own house?
So that was a long debate. It was a long debate around that, and the answer is no, unless you are a medical card holder. Then you're allowed 5 plants, 5 inches tall, 5 plants, and that's not recreation. So I'm not sure how much policing is done when it's medical, but I know for recreation, the answer is no.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, so even if you are a medical card holder, you have to apply for a license to grow in your own home, and it's 5 plants of 5 inches or taller. So at any point, which my limited understanding is that means that only 5 plants would actually be flowering for you to be able to use for recreational or medicinal purposes. There's very stringent requirements around, they have to be kept out of a public sight line, they have to be kept in a secured location. The law is very explicit about you're not allowed to use in front of minors. There's so many provisions and safety nets in place about this, and it is still criminal if you are growing your own to share that with a friend or to sell that on the street. That is still manufacturing and delivery of cannabis and subject to felony offenses.
From a policing standpoint, I'll tell you that the Fourth Amendment offers some pretty stringent protections for someone's home. So in order for that information to come to us, we wouldn't be able to take action unless either we saw it in plain view, we were in the house, or if we had a search warrant. And that would take a pretty extensive investigation. I can't imagine that we wouldn't go into somebody's house and measure how many inches their plant is. Does that make sense to you? I don't think that's a good use of your resources. So.
And I think, Senator, maybe, I'm not sure if it's in Illinois, but I was in a few other states. Most states who, if you have your medical marijuana card, you cannot possess a firearm, or you will have to give it up. And I think, is it the same for Illinois or no? Okay.
Well, building on that question, how will police be trained to tell if a person is impaired on cannabis, whether it's medical or recreational?
I don't know if there's a distinction. Earlier I said there was no test. What I meant is chemical tests, but there is a field test that can be conducted. But I don't know that there's a distinction between intoxication from medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, so I don't have an answer to that.
So I think the only difference between medical and recreational is that recreational is for whomever, 21 and over. So it's recreation, but it's the same flower, it's the same buds, it's the same, I believe now. So I think it's all the same. So when you ask the question, do you support medical but not recreational? It's just the fact that medical came out and it's licensed. A doctor says you're eligible based on this criteria that the state established that has all these illnesses. Recreation just says it's for whomever would like to go out and purchase. It's still the same products.
We're actually building on that for the police department. How ready are local police departments to deal with the effects of this? And do you think you have are going to need additional resources? You won't know until you know. But what's the police department's, I guess, money impact here on their and resources, and whether it would take away from other areas in the community?
I mean, a lot of that remains to be seen. I think, there are local medical marijuana establishments already. We have an Alma Park, Oak Park, and we haven't seen an uptake yet in any kind of enforcement needed as far as accidents or anything like that. So that could change, but just like anything, if it's legal now or illegal, we're kind of just going to operate based on what the law says and what we're allowed to do and or not allowed to do as far as charging people, enforcing, or even educating the community. Not everything has to end in arrest if we can educate people. It kind of remains to be seen as far as resources and how this will impact the community. And any questions that come up with that, we have the same questions. In the law enforcement community, it's just like the law is coming, and we are going to continue just doing what we do, and we'll see what happens, see what needs pop up. We'll see kind of what case law begins to establish as cases are processed, and we'll go from there.
I think the only thing I can add is that it's a collaborative process between the community and the police. And I remember there was a lot of angst when concealed carry came about, and we haven't seen an uptick of issues in our community related to concealed carry. But we did still talk about things like locking up your handguns and your weapons. So if you are an adult and you're using recreational marijuana, I would encourage you to hide or lock up your stash because it should not be available to any young people who are inside your home. So
This may be a good time for me to just tell you guys about the revenue allocation because it's nowhere written that you may have easy access to it. But the tax revenue will first be allocated for agencies' administrative needs and the costs incurred from the expungement process. The remaining of the money will be split up like this. So 2% for public education and safety campaigns, 8% for law enforcement funds for prevention and training to be distributed through the local government distributive fund formula, 25% for the Recovery, Reinvest, and Renew program, 20% for programs that address prevention, substance abuse programs, and mental health services, 10% for the state's bill backlog, and 35% to the remaining amount to the general revenue fund. So that's the allocation of funds. So the police will receive 8% for prevention and training.
I have a question.
And that's local police and/or that 8% was for all the police across the state, or for?
It's a law enforcement fund. It's a law enforcement fund that would be distributed just like the local government distributive fund, which is state funds that go to all municipalities, and most of the towns use the money for their police and fire.
Who establishes that?
If you have a question, there's some written
I have one up there
cards. You can
already.
write
I
your question up, please.
Something jumped in my head.
Yeah, let's get that lady a card. Couple of things. What is the difference between synthetic marijuana and grown marijuana? Is there such a thing?
So marijuana comes from the actual plant, the cannabis plant, and it's it's a natural product. Now the synthetic stuff is actually manufactured in a laboratory. It's like the K2s they used to have, or still do, right? So it's just a fake substance that's being made to mimic marijuana, and often it's considered harmless, but it really isn't, and there are equally many side effects to it.
And that also is going to be regulated within this law?
I do not think so.
No, so synthetic marijuana is still a scheduled drug, and it's actually it's usually called K2 or spice, and it's a lot of time it's marketed as potpourri, but the inherent use is really to ingest it, and it's all chemicals, and there's nothing good that can come from it. So it's not regulated. A lot of times it'll be there's been police drug busts and stuff where it's been found maybe 100 packages of the K2 or spice, and when they test it, each package might test differently because they don't know what's in it. It's all unregulated, and it's all just kind of a criminal enterprise.
What is a public space, and where could a person over 21 smoke?
I can go for it. Public consumption sites have to be first set up by the local ordinances in the municipalities. So right now there aren't any, to be totally honest with you, unless you're a homeowner and you're smoking within your own home. I shared with you guys earlier, if you live in a building and you're renting and your landlord is opposed to it, then you cannot, or they will not be able to partake in that building. They cannot just go to a local park and sit in a swing or walk down the block and smoke. Those are the things that we made sure were not acceptable in the law. And so public consumption sites will have to be sites that will be conducive for those who are not able to smoke in their car or any other light.
I'll just, as far as River Forest goes, public consumption, like smoking lounges and on-site consumption, would be prohibited, and regulations would restrict where it can be possessed and consumed. And you can find out more about River Forest has been ongoing about this at brf.us/cannabis.
A couple questions on tax rates. What are the tax rates imposed by the state legislature? And will these rates drive people maybe to a black market use? And also, is it consistent? Are all municipalities able to determine their own tax rate then on the product?
My understanding is that as municipalities decide how they're going to approach regulation and sale in their jurisdiction, they are allowed to tax up to 3% of those profits for their jurisdiction. So it'll be a process in Park and River Forest to determine whether they want to tax all the way up to that 3% or if they want to tax anywhere between 0 to 3. Beyond that, was there a second part of that question?
Black market.
Yeah, black market. Well, if the tax is too high, will that drive people then to, go back to the way it has been with just buying from a dealer?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. What I can tell you is that there is a very vibrant black market that exists that's being supplied from states where it's legal. So for states that it is illegal, individuals travel to Colorado, California, places like that, and they will purchase marijuana and bring it back to their state.
When people hear about marijuana legalization, they get happy, but then when they say, okay, we're going to tax it, then they're like, okay, this is too much, right? Because if you look at the taxes, if you get a 30 grams or a dub or a dime, whatever, you're not going to pay the average like that on the street. What we've seen in Colorado is that after legalization, the black market has increased. And one thing that I would like to educate everybody here today, since Illinois had passed, is the fact that be careful on who's moving into your neighborhoods and the cartels. You can go on the DA website, there's information about it, because you have cartels who are moving to states that have legalized recreational marijuana, buying the property and growing the whole entire property into a grow house. And you would never know. Someone would literally rip out the walls from the first floor, from the basement all the way up, and the whole house would be a marijuana house. So just be mindful that you may have some of those issues rising in your community. So please make sure that you check on your neighbors and pay attention to who's moving into your neighborhood, because this is what we're seeing in states who legalize it, that cartels are coming from out of state, setting up shop and creating grow houses.
I'll just add to that. We were out in Seattle in February visiting with the prosecutors and police department there, talking about they have a really great program that's law enforcement assisted diversion, and working around the issue that we so often criminalize addiction, and we so often criminalize these things that what people really need is mental health services, and they need treatment and they need support. And we talked to them knowing that this was going to be a conversation here in Illinois about what did it look like when you guys legalized marijuana? What did you see on the streets in your prosecutors' courtrooms, the judges' courtrooms, as prosecutors? And they said there was a bubble, and then it burst, because what it came down to was, if you're someone that's selling on the black market, on the alternative market, you're going to have to up your customer service game, because a whole lot of people just moved into town and are doing a really good job of providing this product in really predictable and regulated ways, and in ways that a lot of people are eager to seek out. And so while in Seattle they don't struggle with the same type of violent associations with drugs that we sometimes see here in Cook County, they were very optimistic about the fact that they did see a little bit of a swell, and then it tended to recede, because eventually the markets kind of merged, and the ability to access the product in a safe way, in a way that people could predict and they knew what they were getting, was more of an appeal than the immediate price reduction.
Just to speak on the emergence of a grow house next to you. First of all, the Oak Park Police Department and other municipalities in the area have relationships with the DEA. If there is a house that is a potential grow house, their electric bill is going to spike. There's going to be various things that we see that indicate to us that there's illegal activity, and we look for those places, and we will mitigate those situations. So I don't want you thinking that you have to spy on your neighbors. We'll take care of it. Thank you.
Well, then this is a question for the officers and Christina. So if the state's attorney office isn't prosecuting low amounts of possession, how does law enforcement deal with maybe stopping somebody and finding they're impaired, or someone smoking in a public space? How does law enforcement deal with that if there's not going to be prosecution?
So currently, law enforcement is still able to interrupt that activity. All drug charges in Cook County are direct filed, which means that they can file those charges. They don't go through our felony review process in the same way that all of our other felony cases do. We just then decline to prosecute them once they get to us in that stage of the game. Once it's legalized, as of January 1, it will be legal to possess up to 30 grams. Things like public use are still illegal. So you can still receive a citation in the same way that you would for public use of alcohol or open container laws. Similarly with driving while impaired. I'll turn it over to you guys to think about that, but I know the Illinois State Police is working really hard to make sure that we do have mechanisms for holding individuals accountable who are driving under the influence. You're subject to traffic stops for probable cause like erratic driving or speeding or any of the normal things that you currently see. So from that perspective, how this will actually be and how officers will be interacting with you on the street will probably not look that much different.
What she said.
What the chief said.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was serious. Yeah, that was great.
Well, then to build on that is, and one of the issues that certainly maybe not as much in our community, but in other communities, and especially in Chicago, What would happen if an immigrant were to be caught in a public place with less than 30 grams of marijuana? Or the whole issue of the still under the certain laws and regulations. How does that deal with an immigrant?
We would treat that individual no different than a citizen or anybody else. I don't understand the question.
Well, I think that.
So from an enforcement perspective, absolutely. They're afforded equal protections. However, marijuana is still a federal offense, and so it is therefore a deportable offense. And so individuals who are anything less than a full U.S. citizen, we would discourage from getting involved in the industry in any way, shape, or form, because we would never want them to lie about their use to a federal immigration officer. But it is a deportable offense. And so we recently welcomed an immigration policy and legal advisor to the state's attorney's office, who has been a great addition to our team in how we think about these issues, because we know that equal enforcement of the law does not always mean equal outcomes for every person. So it could be a deportable offense.
And if the question is whether the Oak Park Police Department would call INS or if we had this information, the answer to that is no.
And same for Reforest, and we wouldn't be looking into the background or anything like that. It would just simply be to issue a citation and move forward.
And I would literally say this, federally, marijuana is still illegal. So I tell people all the time, today or tomorrow, the state's attorney can get reelected or someone can beat her or him in a campaign and decide to prosecute marijuana charges, and they can. If the United States Attorney General decides to wake up tomorrow and say, hey, we want to prosecute and take marijuana seriously, then they have the right to come into the states and and haul it. So I just want to make it clear. It depends on your elected officials, but this drug is still illegal federally. And today or tomorrow, we can wake up and just see something totally different, where a federal government will really come into states.
One last question here before we would like to go over the survey results before everybody leaves. But the question about, and came up with some of the presentations on things that's happening in the schools. What's the expectation of increased or the same staffing to make sure that the incidents at the schools are, or the impact of this is negligible at our schools?
Sorry, can you just ask that one more time?
The question is about expectations and staffing plans at the schools that with the legalization, at least for OPRF now in the community, because Oak Park has said that there can be dispensaries. Do you expect for, even with River Forest, because they do deal with the park kids too, that there would be increased staffing levels at the high school, or would there be impact for staffing levels at the high school with your community and your resource officers, things like that?
So, the Oak Park Police Department supplies school resource officers at both the middle school and high school in town. I don't project that we would be increasing our staffing, but what I can tell you is that our officers that are assigned to those schools spend a lot of time engaging the youth. And so with the new law, I think that will be part of the conversation. When it comes to the elementary schools, our resident beat officers serve as de facto school resource officers, and they travel to the different elementary schools in their zones and also engage with the students at their level. So will there be an increase in staffing? I can't speak to the school districts, but from the police department standpoint, there may be a change in discourse or a change in the conversation.
I'll just respond quickly. So prosecutorial discretion is a very big thing, but once something becomes legal, we don't get to decide to prosecute something that's legal as illegal. So the state's attorney's office will not be prosecuting low-level marijuana offenses or changing our minds on this once it becomes legal.
And before we go over the survey questions, there were a lot of questions that were specific to Oak Park and maybe River Forest. The people on this panel have not made the decision whether Oak Park is, that Oak Park is legalizing the sale of marijuana. So to ask those questions here, I'm not sure that there'd be a fair way to get an answer from these people. So they're giving you information on the state law, Cook County, local police, but if you have other questions about the taxes and what our local municipality is going to do now, those need to be directed at our local officials to get those answers, and I'm sure you will all do that, but I just wanted to clarify that if you didn't think your question was answered. So Kelly's going to come up and talk about the survey.
So we'll go over that in just 1 second. We're going to go quickly through the survey answers, but I know that Vicki Skagen, the village clerk, wanted to make an announcement as well. I would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight, especially the panelists. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm really just coming up here for one reason, and that is to thank not only everybody for being here, and Kelly and PYD and the League of Women Voters for planning this, but also this is an important topic, and we have a number of elected officials who spent their evening listening tonight. And so, Trustee Buchanan, for the Village of Oak Park, Trustee Boutet, Trustee Pavia, Trustee Andrews, and City President, we have our Township Supervisor for River Forest elected, Carla Sloan. In the back, we have River Forest Trustee Pamela Hennick. And District 90 for River Forest Elementary School District Trustee Barb Hickey. So thank you very much for your service and for your concern with this topic.
And elected village clerk, Nicole Park. The survey right now. And then I would also like to thank Sergeant John Chambers with the Illinois National Guard Counter Drug Task Force. He has volunteered his time to help us get some input from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And I also want to just say this is an opportunity to learn from many perspectives about the important law that will be kind of changing as of January 1st.
So I'm just going to scroll through these real quick and read them off for you. These are just the questions and the answers. So the first slide is the first slide, obviously. So the age group, the way this populates is that everything else is in red except for the highest answer. So it doesn't mean good or bad, it's just the highest answer just populates as green. So then it'll give you percentages on those. So I don't know if you guys can see it all the way on the other side. Okay, so the highest age group present was 50 and over at 53%. The lowest was tied for under 18 and 18 to 27 at 6%. And then we had 28 to 38 at 10 and 39 to 49 at 25. Gender, 20 male, 31 female, 1 prefer not to identify. Are you a parent of a child or children under 18 living within Oak Park or River Forest area? 11 answered yes, and 42 answered no. And our first question, in what community do you reside? We had 6 River Forest, 31 Oak Park, and 16 other. These were out of 52 to 53 responses submitted. Question 2, how supportive are you of the sale of recreational marijuana in Oak Park and River Forest? 14 very supportive, 13 somewhat supportive, 17 C not supportive, and 8 undecided or in need of more information. and it looks like it's populating the green and red however it wants to. Question 3, are you concerned that the legalization of recreational marijuana will require an increase in community services, i.e. physical health, mental health, policing, etc.? 30 answered yes, 14 answered no, and 10 answered unsure. How many recreational marijuana dispensaries do you think would be appropriate in your community? 20 answered 0, 31 answered 1 to 3, 1 answered 3 to 5, and 1 answered 5 or more. I bet that 5 or more was our MC up there. Okay, so how concerned are you about the underage use of marijuana increasing following the legalization of recreational marijuana for those aged 21 and over? 24 answered very concerned, 15 answered somewhat concerned, 13 answered not concerned, and 1 was undecided or needed more information. And then our last question, how confident are you that you understand the state laws going into effect January 1, 2020 that regulate the sale and usage of recreational marijuana? 12 said very confident, 17 answered somewhat confident, and 23 answered not confident. And those were all of our questions.
All right, well, another segment of information that you take away with you, at least from a small microcosm of our surrounding communities. I would like to thank Senator Lightford for joining us today, Christina Kelpa, Chief LaDonna Reynolds, Edwards, and Sergeant Ben Ransom, and Anita Pintor for giving us all this information, and we really appreciate it, and hopefully going forward, if you have more questions, to keep asking them, because that's the only way we'll find out what's the best for our community. Thank you very much.
If you need more information, we have plenty of handouts up here on the PYD table that really do relate to what the law, some of the information that they mentioned here tonight. Again, thank you for coming out. Have a good night.